The gunshot that rang out across the dusty street of Ukiah, California, that scorching afternoon in July of 1878 was not meant for Beatrice Ellsworth. But the words that followed cut deeper than any bullet ever could. Beatrice had only arrived in town 3 days prior, stepping off the stagecoach with nothing but a worn carpetbag, and a letter from her late aunt's lawyer informing her that she had inherited a small boarding house on the edge of town. At 22 years old, she had left behind a suffocating life in Boston, where her father's gambling debts had nearly forced her into a marriage with a man 3 times her age. The inheritance had been her salvation, her chance to build something of her own in a place where nobody knew her past or her family's shame. The boarding house needed work, but it was hers. The previous 3 days had been spent scrubbing floors, washing windows, and taking inventory of what furniture remained. She had ventured into town that afternoon to purchase supplies from the general store, her small purse containing just enough money to get by until she could secure her first tenants. She had been walking along the wooden sidewalk, her simple blue calico dress already dusty from the California heat, when she heard the commotion. A group of men had gathered outside the Silver Dollar Saloon, their voices loud and rough with whiskey. Beatrice had learned quickly that in a town like Ukiah, a woman alone was best served by keeping her head down and minding her own business. But keeping her head down did not prevent them from noticing her. "Well, look at what we have here," one of the men called out, a barrel-chested figure with a thick beard and cruel eyes. "A fancy Boston lady from the looks of those manners." Beatrice quickened her pace, clutching her shopping basket tighter. She had perhaps 10 more steps until she could turn the corner toward the general store. "I am talking to you, missy," the man continued, stepping off the saloon porch and into her path. 2 other men flanked him, grinning with the particular malice of those who enjoyed intimidation. "It is rude not to answer when a gentleman addresses you." "Please excuse me," Beatrice said quietly, trying to step around him. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she could feel the eyes of other townspeople on her, though none moved to intervene. The bearded man grabbed her arm, his grip rough enough to bruise. "What is a woman like you doing owning property in this town anyway? That boarding house should have gone to someone who knows what they are doing, not some Eastern girl who probably cannot even cook a decent meal." "Let me go," Beatrice said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Maybe you need someone to teach you how things work out here," another man said, laughing. "A woman alone trying to run a business, it is practically an invitation for trouble." "The lady asked you to let her go." The voice came from behind the men, calm and steady as a river stone. Beatrice could not see who had spoken, but she felt the grip on her arm loosen slightly. The 3 men turned, and she caught her first glimpse of the man who had spoken. He stood perhaps 6 feet tall, lean but solid in the way of men who made their living through hard work rather than bulk. His dark hair curled slightly beneath a worn black hat, and his face was sun-bronzed and angular, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a striking shade of gray-green that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore simple clothes, a faded shirt, dust-covered trousers, worn boots, and a gun belt that sat comfortably on his hips. He could not have been much older than 25 or 26, she guessed. "This does not concern you, Foster," the bearded man said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier bravado. "I am making it my concern, Dalton," the man replied. His hand rested casually near his gun, not threatening but ready. "Let the lady go about her business. Since when do you care about some stranger?" Dalton challenged, though he had released Beatrice's arm. "Some things do not need a reason," the man said, his gray-green eyes never leaving Dalton's face. "Madam, the general store is just around the corner. You go on ahead." Beatrice hesitated, not wanting to leave this stranger to face 3 men on her account, but something in his steady gaze told her that arguing would only make things worse. She nodded once, then walked past the group with as much dignity as she could muster, her legs shaking beneath her skirts. She could hear voices behind her, tense but not escalating into violence, and by the time she reached the corner, she heard boots dispersing in different directions. When she glanced back, the 3 men were heading back into the saloon, and the man who had defended her was walking in the opposite direction toward the livery stable. Inside the general store, Beatrice found her hands trembling as she tried to select the items she needed. The shopkeeper, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes named Mrs. Patterson, noticed her distress. "I saw what happened out there," Mrs. Patterson said softly, wrapping Beatrice's purchases in brown paper. "Those men are trouble, especially when they have been drinking. You did right not to engage with them." "Who was the man who intervened?" Beatrice asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened with something like respect. "That would be Zachary Foster. He works at the Fletcher Ranch outside town, has been there about 2 years now. Keeps to himself mostly, but he is a good man. Honest. Works harder than any 3 men combined from what I hear." "Does he often involve himself in such situations?" "Not particularly, Mrs. Patterson admitted, placing the wrapped goods in Beatrice's basket. "Zachary is the quiet type, does his job and does not look for trouble, but I have noticed he has a strong sense of what is right and wrong. Saw him break up a fight once where a man was beating his horse." Zachary did not say much, just stepped in and made it clear that behavior would not continue, at least not where he could see it. Beatrice paid for her purchases, her mind still on the gray-green eyes and calm voice. "I should thank him properly." "He will likely be working at the Fletcher Ranch," Mrs. Patterson said. "It is about 3 miles west of town. You cannot miss it. But dear, you should know that Zachary is not one for socializing. He is polite enough, but he keeps people at a distance. I do not think anyone in town knows much about where he came from or what brought him here." That evening, as Beatrice prepared a simple supper in her boarding house kitchen, she could not stop thinking about the encounter. The fear she had felt when Dalton grabbed her arm had been real and sharp, made worse by the knowledge that none of the other townspeople had moved to help her. But Zachary Foster had intervened without hesitation, without even knowing her name. She touched the bruise forming on her arm where Dalton had gripped her, wincing slightly. The boarding house felt very empty suddenly, and very quiet. She had been so focused on the practical aspects of her new life, cleaning and repairs and inventory, that she had not fully considered how isolated she would be. In Boston, for all its suffocating expectations, she had at least been surrounded by people. Here, she was truly alone. The next morning, Beatrice woke with determination solidifying in her chest. She would not be the kind of woman who hid away because of one bad encounter. She had come west to build a new life, and that meant facing whatever challenges arose with courage. It also meant properly thanking the man who had helped her. She spent the morning baking, using precious flour and sugar to make a simple pound cake. It was not much, but it was all she could manage with her limited supplies. When it had cooled, she wrapped it carefully in a clean cloth, changed into her better dress, a modest gray cotton with black trim, and set out walking toward the Fletcher Ranch. The California sun beat down mercilessly as she walked along the dusty road leading west from town. She had borrowed a sunbonnet from the collection of items left behind in the boarding house, and she was grateful for it as the heat intensified. Grasshoppers jumped out of her path, and in the distance, she could see the brown hills that surrounded the valley. The Fletcher Ranch was indeed easy to spot, a sprawling property with a large barn, several outbuildings, and a main house painted white. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could see men working near the corrals. As she approached the main gate, a young man who could not have been more than 16 or 17 noticed her and walked over. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked politely, removing his hat. "I am looking for Zachary Foster," Beatrice said, suddenly feeling foolish. What if he did not want to be sought out? What if her thanks were unwelcome? "Zach is mending fence in the north pasture," the young man said. "But he should be back for dinner soon. You can wait at the main house if you like. I am sure Mrs. Fletcher would not mind." "How far is the north pasture?" Beatrice asked. The young man looked uncertain. "About a mile, maybe a bit more, but it is rough ground, not suitable for a lady to walk alone." "I am afraid I have already walked 3 miles this morning," Beatrice said with a slight smile. "Another mile will not hurt me." "Can you point me in the right direction?" Reluctantly, the young man gave her directions, and Beatrice set off across the ranch property. The ground was indeed rough, scattered with rocks and sparse vegetation, but she had always been stronger than she looked. In Boston, she had often walked for hours to avoid being home, wandering the parks and waterfront despite her mother's protests that such behavior was unladylike. She found Zachary Foster exactly where the young man had said he would be, working on a section of wooden fence that had partially collapsed. He had removed his shirt in the heat, working in just his undershirt, which clung to his back with sweat. He was hammering a new post into the ground, his movements efficient and practiced. "Mr. Foster," Beatrice called out when she was close enough to be heard without shouting. Zachary turned, surprise flickering across his features when he saw her. He quickly grabbed his shirt from where it hung on the fence and pulled it on despite the heat. "Madam," he said, settling his hat more firmly on his head, "you are the lady from town yesterday." "Yes," Beatrice said, suddenly aware of how she must look, dusty and flushed from the walk. "I am Beatrice Ellsworth. I wanted to thank you properly for your intervention yesterday. Those men were quite frightening, and I am grateful you stepped in." "No thanks necessary, madam," Zachary said, picking up his hammer again. "Any decent person would have done the same." "But they did not," Beatrice pointed out. "There were at least a dozen other people on that street, and you were the only one who said anything." Zachary drove another nail into the post, his jaw tight. People in small towns sometimes have complicated relationships. Dalton's father owns a lot of land around here, and folks do not want to make trouble with the family. You were not concerned about making trouble. "I do not have property to lose or business relationships to worry about," Zachary said simply. "I work for wages, and there are always other ranches looking for good hands." Beatrice held out the wrapped cake. "I made this for you as a small token of my appreciation." For the first time, Zachary's carefully neutral expression shifted, revealing what might have been surprise or even discomfort. "Madam, that was not necessary." "I know it was not necessary," Beatrice said. "I wanted to do it." Zachary set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his trousers before accepting the package. He unwrapped it carefully, looking at the golden cake with something like wonder. "This is very kind of you, Miss Ellsworth. Mrs. Patterson at the general store told me your name," Beatrice explained. "And that you work here at the Fletcher Ranch." "That is correct," Zachary said. He seemed unsure what to do next, holding the cake awkwardly. "May I ask you something?" Beatrice ventured. "Yesterday, when you told those men that some things do not need a reason, what did you mean?" Zachary was quiet for a long moment, his gray-green eyes studying the horizon. I meant that doing the right thing should not require justification. You were being harassed, and that was wrong. The reason I intervened was simply because it was the right thing to do, not because I knew you or expected anything in return. That is a rather uncommon philosophy, Beatrice said softly. In my experience, most people only act when there is something to gain. Then you have been around the wrong sort of people, Zachary said, and there was no judgment in his voice, only statement of fact. Beatrice found herself smiling. Perhaps I have. I am hoping that Ukiah will be different. How long have you been in town? Zachary asked, and Beatrice noticed that while his tone remained polite, there was genuine curiosity beneath it. Only 4 days. I inherited my aunt's boarding house, the one on Elm Street. I am trying to get it ready to accept tenants. That is ambitious for a woman alone, Zachary observed, then quickly added, I mean no offense. It is just a lot of work. I am not afraid of work, Beatrice said, and I would rather be working hard on something of my own than living comfortably in a cage. Something flickered in Zachary's eyes, recognition perhaps, or understanding. That is a sentiment I can appreciate. They stood in silence for a moment, the California sun beating down on them. A hawk circled overhead, its cry sharp in the clear air. I should let you get back to your work, Beatrice said finally. I have already taken enough of your time. Will you be all right walking back to town? Zachary asked, and there was concern in his voice that had not been there before. I manage the walk here, Beatrice said. I will manage the return journey. Wait here a moment, Zachary said. He walked over to where his horse was grazing nearby, a sturdy bay gelding. He returned with a canteen. Take this with you. The walk back will be hot and you should stay hydrated. Beatrice accepted the canteen, touched by the gesture. I will return it to you. No hurry, Zachary said. I have others at the bunkhouse. As Beatrice began her walk back toward town, she glanced over her shoulder once and saw Zachary Foster standing by the fence, watching her go. There was something in his stance, something protective and careful, that made her heart beat a little faster. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Beatrice worked tirelessly on the boarding house, scrubbing every surface until it gleamed, mending curtains and arranging the furniture to make the rooms as inviting as possible. She placed advertisements in the local newspaper and at the general store, offering clean rooms at fair rates. Her first tenant arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, a widowed schoolteacher named Mrs. Dorothy Hughes, who was relocating to Ukiah to teach at the small schoolhouse. Mrs. Hughes was in her 50s, with steel gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that Beatrice immediately appreciated. I require a quiet room, regular meals, and no tolerance for drinking or unsavory behavior, Mrs. Hughes announced upon inspecting the boarding house. I can assure you of all three, Beatrice replied. I run a respectable establishment. Good, Mrs. Hughes said, setting down her bags. Then we shall get along just fine. I will take the room at the end of the hall. When is supper? Within a week, Beatrice had 3 more tenants, all respectable working men who kept regular hours and caused no trouble. The boarding house was far from profitable yet, but it was beginning to feel like a real business, something sustainable. She had returned Zachary's canteen to the Fletcher ranch, leaving it with the young man at the gate since Zachary had been out working somewhere on the vast property. She had included a note thanking him again, written on a small piece of paper in her careful script. 2 weeks after their first meeting, Beatrice encountered Zachary again in town. She was carrying supplies from the general store when she saw him leading his horse down the main street. He noticed her at the same moment and something in his expression softened. Miss Ellsworth, he said, tipping his hat. Mr. Foster, she replied, unable to suppress a smile. Thank you for the loan of your canteen. It was very helpful on that hot walk back to town." "You are welcome," Zachary said. He hesitated, then asked, "How is the boarding house coming along?" "I now have 4 tenants," Beatrice said proudly. "It is beginning to feel like a real home, or at least a place where people can feel at home." "That is good," Zachary said, and he sounded genuinely pleased. "You have not had any more trouble from Dalton or his friends?" "No, thankfully," Beatrice said. "I have been careful to avoid them when I see them in town." Zachary's jaw tightened slightly. "You should not have to avoid anyone. This is your town as much as it is theirs." "Perhaps," Beatrice said, "but I have learned that sometimes discretion is the better part of valor." They walked together for a few steps, Zachary leading his horse alongside her. It felt comfortable, natural, despite the fact that they were still essentially strangers. "May I ask you something, Mr. Foster?" Beatrice ventured. "You may ask," Zachary said, "though I cannot promise I will answer." "Mrs. Patterson mentioned that you have been in Ukiah for about 2 years, but that nobody knows much about where you came from. I do not mean to pry, but I find myself curious about the man who defended my honor without being asked." Zachary was quiet for so long that Beatrice began to think he would not respond at all. Finally, he said, "I came from Texas originally. I left for reasons I would rather not discuss. I have been working ranches ever since, moving from place to place. Ukiah has been good to me, and the Fletchers are fair employers. That is all there is to tell, really." Beatrice heard the pain beneath the careful words, the weight of whatever had driven him from his home. She understood that weight, carried her own version of it. "I came from Boston," she said quietly. "My father accumulated significant gambling debts. To settle them, he tried to arrange a marriage between myself and a man who could have been my grandfather. I refused, and he disowned me. When my aunt passed and left me the boarding house, it felt like Providence, a chance to escape and start fresh." Zachary looked at her with something like respect. "That took courage, or desperation," Beatrice said with a slight laugh. "I am not always sure which." "Maybe both," Zachary said. "Maybe that is what all courage is, really. Desperation refined into action." They had reached the boarding house, and Beatrice paused at the gate. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" she asked, surprising herself with the boldness of the invitation. "I know it is not proper, but I have a boarding house full of tenants, so there is nothing improper about it, really." Zachary hesitated, and Beatrice could see the war playing out behind his eyes, the desire to accept versus whatever instinct told him to keep his distance. "Just coffee," she added softly, "between 2 people who understand what it means to start over." "All right," Zachary said finally. "Just for a short while. I need to get back to the ranch before dark." Inside, the boarding house was cool and clean, smelling faintly of lemon soap and fresh bread. Mrs. Hughes was in the parlor, reading a book, and she looked up with sharp curiosity when Beatrice entered with Zachary. "Mrs. Hughes, this is Mr. Zachary Foster," Beatrice introduced. "He works at the Fletcher Ranch. Mr. Foster, this is Mrs. Dorothy Hughes, one of my tenants and the new schoolteacher." "Pleased to meet you, madam," Zachary said politely, removing his hat. Mrs. Hughes studied him with the assessing gaze of someone who had spent decades evaluating young people. "Fletcher Ranch, you say? I have heard that is good, honest work. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Foster." In the kitchen, Beatrice prepared coffee while Zachary stood somewhat awkwardly by the table. She could sense his discomfort at being inside in what was clearly her domain, and she worked quickly to put him at ease. "Please, sit," she said, gesturing to the table. "You do not have to stand on ceremony here." Zachary sat, placing his hat on the table beside him. Beatrice poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him, noting the way his large, work-roughened hands dwarfed the delicate china cup. "This is a nice place," Zachary said, looking around the kitchen. "You have done well with it." "Thank you," Beatrice said. "It still needs work, but it is coming together. The roof leaks in 2 places and the back porch is sagging, but those are problems for another day." "I could take a look at the roof if you like," Zachary offered, then seemed surprised at his own words. "I mean, if you need help. I have done plenty of repair work." "I could not ask you to do that," Beatrice protested, even as her heart lifted at the offer. "You already work all day at the ranch." "I have Sundays off," Zachary said, "and I am not asking for pay. Consider it repayment for the cake, which was excellent, by the way." "A roof repair is worth considerably more than a pound cake," Beatrice pointed out. "Then maybe you could make supper," Zachary suggested, his gray-green eyes meeting hers. "Fair trade." Beatrice felt warmth spread through her chest. "That seems more than fair. Thank you, Mr. Foster. You can call me Zachary," he said quietly, "if you want." "Then you should call me Beatrice," she replied, smiling. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing more easily than Beatrice would have expected. Zachary told her about the Fletcher Ranch, about the cattle and horses, about the particular challenges of ranching in California's climate. Beatrice told him about her plans for the boarding house, about her hopes to eventually expand, perhaps add a small dining room that could serve meals to non-residents as well. "You think big," Zachary observed, but there was admiration in his voice rather than criticism. "My mother always said I had more ambition than was proper for a woman," Beatrice said. "She meant it as an insult, but I took it as a compliment." "As you should," Zachary said. "Ambition is not a flaw, regardless of gender." When Zachary finally stood to leave, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Beatrice walked him to the door, suddenly reluctant to see him go. "Thank you for the coffee," Zachary said, settling his hat on his head, "and for the conversation. It has been a long time since I talked with anyone like that." "I feel the same way," Beatrice admitted. "Will you really come on Sunday to look at the roof?" "I will," Zachary promised, "weather permitting." Beatrice watched him ride away, his figure silhouetted against the sunset. "Mrs. Hughes appeared beside her, making Beatrice jump slightly. "That young man is quite taken with you," Mrs. Hughes observed. "We barely know each other," Beatrice protested, though she could feel heat rising in her cheeks. "I have been teaching young people for 30 years, Mrs. Hughes said dryly. "I know infatuation when I see it, and unless I miss my guess, the feeling is mutual." Beatrice could not deny it, so she said nothing, simply closing the door against the cooling evening air. Sunday arrived with clear skies and temperatures that promised to be scorching by afternoon. Beatrice woke early, her stomach fluttering with an anticipation she tried to tell herself was merely about getting the roof repaired. She prepared a large breakfast for her tenants, then set about making preparations for supper, wanting to have something substantial ready for Zachary after he worked. He arrived mid-morning, riding up to the boarding house with tools strapped to his saddle. He had clearly bathed and put on clean clothes, his dark hair still damp and curling slightly at the edges. "Good morning," Beatrice called from the porch, where she had been watching for him with an eagerness she would not admit aloud. "Morning," Zachary replied, swinging down from his horse. "Ready to show me this troublesome roof?" Beatrice led him through the house and up to the attic, where the leaks were most evident. Zachary examined the water stains carefully, then climbed out onto the roof itself to inspect the shingles. "You have got several missing shingles here," he called down, "and some of the flashing around the chimney has come loose. Nothing too serious, but it needs to be fixed before the next rain or it will get worse." "Can you repair it?" Beatrice asked, shading her eyes as she looked up at him. "Yes, but I will need to go into town to get supplies. Do you have an account at the hardware store?" "I do," Beatrice confirmed. "Whatever you need, put it on my account." Zachary disappeared into town and returned an hour later with shingles, nails, and new flashing. He worked steadily through the morning and into the afternoon, the sun beating down mercilessly on the roof. Beatrice brought him water and cool cloths, worried about him overheating. "You should take a break," she urged when she brought him lunch, a plate of cold chicken and bread. "I am almost done," Zachary said, accepting the plate gratefully. Another hour should do it. He was true to his word, climbing down from the roof just as the church bells rang 3 o'clock. His shirt was soaked with sweat and his face was flushed from the heat, but he was smiling with the satisfaction of a job well done. "The roof is sound now," he announced. "It should hold through the winter rains without any problems." "Come inside," Beatrice urged. "You need to cool down and wash up. I have supper nearly ready." Zachary followed her inside, and she directed him to the washroom where he could clean up. When he emerged, his face and hands scrubbed clean, his hair damp again, she had supper laid out on the dining room table. Her tenants had already eaten earlier, giving them privacy. "This looks wonderful," Zachary said, taking in the spread. She had made pot roast with vegetables, fresh bread, and an apple pie that was cooling on the sideboard. They ate together, the conversation flowing as easily as it had during their coffee. Zachary told her stories about growing up in Texas, carefully avoiding whatever had driven him away. Beatrice found herself laughing at his dry humor, at the way he described various mishaps and adventures. "You have a gift for storytelling," she said, serving him a generous slice of pie. "I have had a lot of time to practice," Zachary said. "Working ranches is lonely work sometimes. You spend a lot of time alone with your thoughts and memories." "Do you like it?" Beatrice asked. "The solitary nature of it, I mean." Zachary considered the question carefully. "I think I needed it for a while, needed the space and quiet to work through some things. But lately, I have found myself wanting something more. Connection, I suppose, purpose beyond just the next day's work." "I understand that," Beatrice said softly. "I spent so much of my life trying to meet other people's expectations, trying to fit into the mold they had created for me. Coming here, building something of my own, it has made me realize how much of myself I had been suppressing." "You do not seem like the suppressing type," Zachary observed with a slight smile. "I've gotten better at not caring what others think," Beatrice admitted, "but it is still a work in progress." After supper, they sat on the front porch as the evening cooled, watching the sun set over the hills. Zachary sat in one of the rocking chairs Beatrice had repaired, his long legs stretched out before him, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. "Thank you for fixing my roof," Beatrice said, "and for the conversation. You have made today very pleasant." "Thank you for the meal," Zachary replied, "and for the company. I did not realize how much I had been missing this, just sitting and talking with someone who understands." "Understands what?" Beatrice asked gently. "What it is like to be running from something," Zachary said quietly. "Even when you are trying to run toward something better." Beatrice reached over and placed her hand on his arm, a brief touch meant to convey understanding and comfort. Zachary looked at her hand, then up at her face, and something passed between them, something electric and undeniable. "I should go," Zachary said, but he made no move to stand. "You could stay a while longer," Beatrice suggested, "if you wanted." "I want to," Zachary admitted. "That is why I should go. Beatrice, I am not in a position to court anyone properly. I have nothing to offer beyond day wages and a reputation for being a drifter." "I did not ask you to court me," Beatrice pointed out, though her heart was racing. I just asked you to stay and watch the sunset." Zachary smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. "You are dangerous, do you know that?" "I have been called worse things," Beatrice said lightly. He stayed for another hour, and when he finally mounted his horse to return to the ranch, Beatrice felt the loss of his presence like a physical ache. "May I come visit again?" Zachary asked from the saddle. "Not for work, just to visit." "I would like that very much," Beatrice said, hoping her voice did not betray how desperately she meant it. Over the following weeks, Zachary became a regular presence at the boarding house. He would ride in after work sometimes, or on Sunday afternoons, always with some excuse about checking on the roof or inspecting some other repair he had made. They would sit on the porch and talk for hours, their conversations ranging from the practical to the philosophical. Beatrice found herself living for those visits, for the sound of his horses' hooves on the road, for the way his gray-green eyes lit up when he saw her. She was falling in love, she knew, falling hard and fast in a way that should have terrified her, but instead felt like the most natural thing in the world. Mrs. Hughes watched their courtship, if it could be called that, with a mixture of approval and concern. "That young man is absolutely besotted with you," she told Beatrice one evening after Zachary had left. "But he is holding himself back. I wonder why." "He has his reasons," Beatrice said, not wanting to betray Zachary's confidence about his past. "We all have our reasons," Mrs. Hughes said wisely. "The question is whether we let those reasons rule us, or whether we have the courage to move past them." The situation came to a head on a Saturday evening in late September. Beatrice had gone into town to mail letters and purchase supplies. The weather had turned cooler, and she was grateful for her shawl as she walked along the now familiar streets. She was just leaving the post office when she encountered Dalton and his two companions outside the saloon. They were drunk, their movements unsteady, their voices loud. Beatrice's stomach tightened with fear, but she kept her head high and tried to walk past them. "Well, if it is not the boarding house lady," Dalton slurred, stepping into her path. "Still think you are too good for us regular folk." "Excuse me, please," Beatrice said firmly, trying to step around him. Dalton grabbed her wrist, his grip painfully tight. "I am talking to you. It is rude to walk away when someone is talking." "Let me go," Beatrice demanded, trying to pull free. Her heart was pounding and she looked around desperately for help, but the street was relatively empty. "Maybe you need to learn some manners," one of Dalton's companions said, laughing. "Maybe we should teach you." "That would be a mistake." Zachary's voice cut through the evening air like a blade. He stood perhaps 10 feet away, his stance relaxed but ready. He must have been in town for supplies, Beatrice realized, seeing his horse tied outside the general store. "This again," Dalton said, but he released Beatrice's wrist. "You have a lot of nerve, Foster, always interfering in things that are not your business." "I told you before, when it involves a lady being harassed, I make it my business," Zachary said, moving closer. "Now you have two choices. You can apologize to Miss Ellsworth and go back into the saloon, or we can settle this another way." "You think you can take all three of us?" one of Dalton's friends challenged. "I think I would rather not find out," Zachary said honestly, "but I will if I have to." "The question is your pride worth getting hurt over?" Dalton's face flushed with anger and alcohol, and for a moment, Beatrice thought he might actually attack Zachary. But something in Zachary's steady gaze, in the quiet confidence of his stance, made Dalton think better of it. "This is not over," Dalton said, his voice full of impotent rage. "You have made an enemy today, Foster." "I have had worse enemies," Zachary said calmly. "Now apologize to the lady." Dalton mumbled something that might have been an apology, though it was hard to tell through his slurred speech. Zachary kept himself between Beatrice and the men until they had retreated back into the saloon. "Are you all right?" Zachary asked, turning to her with concern evident in his eyes. He gently took her wrist, examining where Dalton had grabbed her. Angry red marks were already forming. "I am fine," Beatrice said, though she was shaking. "Thank you for intervening again. I seem to make a habit of needing rescue." "You do not need rescuing," Zachary said firmly. "You were handling yourself well. I just helped even the odds." "Zachary, that man threatened you," Beatrice said, her fear transforming into concern for him. "He said he would make you an enemy." "Dalton is all talk when he is sober and just noise when he is drunk," Zachary said dismissively. "I am not worried about him." "But I am worried about you," Beatrice said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "You have put yourself at risk twice now on my account, and I cannot bear the thought of something happening to you because of me." Zachary looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, softened, opened. "Beatrice, nothing that might happen is because of you. It is because of the choice I make to stand up for what is right, and even if there were consequences, I would make the same choice again." "Why?" Beatrice asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you risk so much for someone you barely know?" "Because I care about you," Zachary said simply. "I know I have no right to, I know I should keep my distance, but I cannot seem to help it. From the moment I saw you on that street, something in me recognized something in you. I cannot explain it better than that." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, not from fear or sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of hearing him say what she had been feeling for weeks. "I care about you too. So much that it frightens me sometimes." Zachary reached out and gently cupped her cheek, his work-roughened hand surprisingly tender. "I do not have much to offer you. I am just a ranch hand with a past I cannot talk about and no prospects beyond day wages. You deserve better than that." "I deserve to choose for myself what I want," Beatrice said, leaning into his touch. "And I choose you if you will have me." "God help me, I will," Zachary said. And then he was kissing her, right there on the main street of Ukiah, with the setting sun painting the sky behind them and the distant sound of music from the saloon drifting on the evening breeze. It was not a gentle kiss, but neither was it demanding. It was a kiss of relief and promise, of two people who had been holding themselves back finally allowing themselves to feel. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, their foreheads pressed together. "Come home with me," Beatrice said. "Stay for supper. Stay for as long as you want." "I want to stay forever," Zachary admitted. "But I should warn you I am a lot of work. I am stubborn and private, and I have more walls built up than a fortress." "Then I will just have to be patient and persistent," Beatrice said, smiling through her tears. "Lucky for you, those are qualities I possess in abundance." They walked back to the boarding house together, Zachary leading his horse with one hand while holding Beatrice's hand with the other. It felt natural, right, like something that had always been meant to happen. At the boarding house, Mrs. Hughes took one look at their joined hands and their flushed faces and simply nodded with satisfaction, retreating to her room to give them privacy. Beatrice prepared a simple cold supper, neither of them particularly hungry but both wanting the normalcy of the routine. "I should tell you about Texas," Zachary said as they sat at the kitchen table. "About why I left. If we are going to do this, if we are going to try to build something together, you deserve to know the truth." "Only if you are ready to tell me," Beatrice said gently. "I will not pressure you." "I want to tell you," Zachary said, taking a deep breath. "I grew up on a ranch outside San Antonio. My father was a hard man, believed in discipline and duty above all else. I had a younger brother, Joseph. We were close, protective of each other in the way brothers are when they have to face a difficult parent together. Beatrice reached across the table and took his hand, sensing the pain in his voice. When I was 23 and Joseph was 19, he fell in love with a Mexican girl from one of the neighboring ranches. Her name was Maria, and she was beautiful and kind, but my father was a bitter man with ugly prejudices. He forbade Joseph from seeing her, threatened to disown him if he disobeyed. Zachary's hand tightened around Beatrice's. Joseph defied him. He and Maria planned to run away together to start over somewhere my father could not reach them, but my father found out about their plans. He confronted Joseph and they fought. I was not there, I was out working the far pastures. By the time I got back, Joseph was dead. "Oh, Zachary," Beatrice breathed, horror and sympathy washing over her. "My father said it was an accident, that Joseph had fallen during their argument and hit his head," Zachary continued, his voice hollow. "But I saw the bruises on Joseph's face, saw the marks on his throat. It was no accident. My father had killed him in a rage, and everyone was too afraid or too loyal to tell the truth." "What did you do?" Beatrice asked softly. "I left," Zachary said. "I confronted my father, told him I knew what he had done. He did not deny it, just said that Joseph had brought it on himself by being disobedient. I left that night and never went back. I could not stay in a place where my brother's killer walked free, where everyone pretended it had been an accident to protect the family name." "That must have been incredibly difficult," Beatrice said. "The difficult part was not leaving," Zachary said. "It was living with the guilt of not being there, of not being able to protect Joseph when he needed me. I have been running from that guilt ever since, working myself to exhaustion so I would not have to think about it. And I have been keeping people at a distance because I did not think I deserved connection or happiness, not when Joseph would never have either." "Joseph would not want you to punish yourself forever," Beatrice said gently. "From what you have said about him, he loved you, he would want you to be happy." "Maybe," Zachary said, "but it has been hard to believe that, until I met you." "What changed?" Beatrice asked. "You reminded me that life is still happening, still worth living," Zachary said. "Watching you build something from nothing, seeing your courage in starting over, it made me realize that I have been existing rather than living. And when Dalton grabbed you that first day, something in me woke up. I realized I did not want to stand by and watch bad things happen anymore. I wanted to act, to protect, to matter." "You do matter," Beatrice said fiercely. "You matter to me, more than I can properly express." They talked long into the night, sharing their histories and their hopes, their fears and their dreams. When Zachary finally left well past midnight, it was with the promise to return the next day and every day after that. True to his word, Zachary became a constant presence in Beatrice's life. He would ride in after work, help her with repairs and improvements to the boarding house, and they would spend their evenings talking and planning for the future. Their courtship was unconventional by the standards of the day, but it was real and deep, and built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. Mrs. Hughes appointed herself a sort of unofficial chaperone, making sure that propriety was maintained while also giving them enough privacy to develop their relationship. "I am not so old that I have forgotten what it is like to be young and in love," she told Beatrice one evening. "But I am old enough to know that a woman's reputation is still important, particularly for someone trying to run a business." 2 months after their first kiss, on a crisp November evening, Zachary asked Beatrice to marry him. They were sitting on the front porch, wrapped in blankets against the cold, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I have been saving my wages," Zachary said without preamble. "I have enough now to rent a small piece of land, maybe start building a house. It would not be much at first, just a cabin really, but it would be ours." "Zachary, what are you saying?" Beatrice asked, her heart beginning to race. "I am saying that I love you and I want to build a life with you," Zachary said, turning to face her fully. "I know I should probably have more to offer, should wait until I can provide better. But I have learned that life is uncertain and tomorrow is not guaranteed. I do not want to waste any more time. Beatrice Ellsworth, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Beatrice said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, absolutely yes." Zachary pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, clearly purchased with his saved wages. It was not fancy or expensive, but to Beatrice, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. He slipped it onto her finger, his hands shaking slightly. "I promise I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you," Zachary said. "You already are," Beatrice replied, kissing him deeply. "You already are." They married in December, a simple ceremony in the small church on the edge of town. Mrs. Hughes stood up for Beatrice, and Tom Fletcher, Zachary's employer, stood up for him. It was a small gathering, but the warmth and love in that little church made it feel grander than any society wedding Beatrice had attended in Boston. The question of where they would live was solved when Beatrice suggested that Zachary simply move into the boarding house. "I need help managing this place anyway," she pointed out practically. "And we will have more privacy here than in a cabin while we save money. Once we have enough, we can decide if we want to build something new or simply make this place fully ours." Zachary agreed, though he insisted on earning his keep by taking over all the repairs and maintenance, as well as helping with the heavier work around the property. He also continued his job at the Fletcher Ranch, wanting to maintain his independence and contribute financially to their household. Their first year of marriage was filled with both challenges and joys. The boarding house thrived under their joint management, with Beatrice handling the domestic side and tenant relations, while Zachary managed repairs and improvements. They added 4 more rooms by enclosing part of the wide back porch, allowing them to house more tenants and increase their income. Zachary proved to be a devoted husband, attentive and loving in ways that sometimes surprised Beatrice given his initial reserve. He was not particularly demonstrative in public, but in private, he was tender and affectionate, always making sure she knew how much he valued and loved her. "You have given me something I thought I had lost forever," he told her one night as they lay in bed, wrapped in each other's arms. "You have given me a home and a purpose beyond just surviving. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for you." "You have given me the same thing," Beatrice replied. "You saw me when I was afraid and vulnerable, and instead of taking advantage, you protected me. You showed me what real honor and courage look like. I will always love you for that." In the spring of their second year of marriage, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She told Zachary one evening after supper, nervous about his reaction despite knowing he would be supportive. "A baby," Zachary said, his gray-green eyes wide with wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Beatrice confirmed, laughing at his stunned expression. "In about 6 months if the doctor's calculations are correct." Zachary swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around despite her protests about being careful. "This is incredible. This is wonderful. This is terrifying." "All of the above," Beatrice agreed, her hands cupping his face. "But we will figure it out together, just like we have figured out everything else." Their son was born in October of 1880, a healthy baby boy with dark hair like his father and blue eyes that would eventually shift to match Zachary's gray-green. They named him Joseph, in honor of Zachary's brother, and Zachary wept when he held his son for the first time. "He would have been a wonderful uncle," Zachary said, gazing down at the infant in his arms. "I wish he could have met you, could have seen what we have built here." "Tell him about his uncle," Beatrice said softly. "Tell him stories so that Joseph's memory stays alive." And Zachary did, as their son grew. He told him stories about Uncle Joseph, about his kindness and his courage, about how he had loved deeply even when it cost him everything. He wanted his son to understand that love was worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth living for. The boarding house continued to flourish. They developed a reputation for being fair and welcoming, and they always had a full roster of tenants. Mrs. Hughes remained with them for 5 years before retiring and moving to San Francisco to live with her daughter, but not before she had declared herself to be young Joseph's honorary grandmother. When Joseph was 3 years old, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. She had her mother's delicate features and her father's steady temperament, and Zachary doted on her shamelessly. "I never thought I would have this," he told Beatrice one evening as they watched their children play in the yard. Joseph was teaching Grace how to stack blocks, his little face serious with concentration. "A family of my own, children to love and raise. After everything that happened in Texas, I thought I was destined to be alone." "You were never destined to be alone," Beatrice said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You just needed to find the right person to share your life with." "Some things don't need a reason," Zachary said, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago on that dusty street. "I defended your honor that day not because I expected anything in return, but because it was the right thing to do. I never imagined it would lead to this, to everything I have now." "Life is funny that way," Beatrice said. "The smallest actions can have the biggest consequences. If you had not intervened that day, if you had just walked past like everyone else, where would we be now?" "I do not want to think about it," Zachary said, pulling her close. "I am just grateful that I did, that I listened to whatever instinct told me to step in." As the years passed, their life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The boarding house became one of the most respected establishments in Ukiah, known for its cleanliness, fair prices, and the warm hospitality of its owners. Zachary eventually left his position at the Fletcher Ranch to focus full-time on managing the property and helping Beatrice run the business. They faced challenges, of course. There were years when money was tight, when illness swept through the household, when the children were difficult and exhausting. But they faced everything together, their partnership built on a foundation of love and respect that only grew stronger with time. Dalton continued to cause occasional problems, his resentment of Zachary never fully fading. But he learned to keep his distance, particularly after Zachary made it clear that he would not tolerate any threats to his family. There were a few tense confrontations over the years, but nothing that ever escalated into serious violence. When Joseph turned 10 and Grace was 7, Zachary took them on a trip to the Fletcher Ranch to teach them about horses and ranching. Tom Fletcher, now an older man but still sharp and active, was happy to host them. "Your father was one of the best workers I ever had," Tom told the children as they sat around the dinner table. "Honest, hardworking, and fair. He taught me that character matters more than background, that a man's worth is measured by his actions rather than his origins." Joseph and Grace listened with wide eyes, proud of their father. Later, as they rode back to town, Joseph asked, "Papa, why did you leave the ranch to work at the boarding house?" "Because sometimes life gives you opportunities that are more important than the path you thought you were on," Zachary explained. "Working at the ranch was good, honest work, and I am grateful for it. But helping your mother build something lasting, raising you and your sister, that is more important than any job I could have." "Did you always want to marry Mama?" Grace asked. Zachary glanced at Beatrice, who was smiling at the question. "Not always," he admitted. When I first met your mother, I thought I had no business even thinking about marriage. I was just a ranch hand with nothing to offer. But your mother saw something in me that I had stopped seeing in myself. She reminded me that I was worth more than my past mistakes, that I deserved happiness and love. What made you finally ask her to marry you? Joseph wanted to know. I realized that I would rather try and fail than never try at all, Zachary said. And I realized that some things are worth taking a risk for. Your mother was definitely worth the risk. Still am, Beatrice teased, and they all laughed. By the time Joseph was 15 and Grace was 12, the boarding house had been paid off entirely, and Zachary and Beatrice owned it outright. They had saved enough money to make some significant improvements, adding a proper dining room and expanding the kitchen. We should celebrate, Beatrice said one evening as they reviewed their finances. We have worked so hard for this. We should take a trip, do something special. What did you have in mind? Zachary asked, pulling her into his lap as they sat at the kitchen table. I was thinking we could go to San Francisco for a week, Beatrice said. The children are old enough now that Mrs. Miller next door could look in on them, and we have reliable staff to manage the boarding house. When was the last time we did something just for ourselves? When you convinced me to take that picnic to the lake last summer, Zachary said, kissing her neck, which was interrupted by Joseph falling in and having to be fished out. Then we are definitely overdue, Beatrice laughed. What do you say? They took the trip that fall, spending a glorious week in San Francisco seeing the sights, eating in fine restaurants, and simply enjoying each other's company without the constant demands of children and business. It was like a second honeymoon, reminding them of why they had fallen in love in the first place. I could get used to this, Zachary said as they walked along the waterfront, holding hands like young lovers. Just you and me, no responsibilities. Liar, Beatrice said affectionately. You would be bored within a month. You need purpose and work to be happy. Maybe, Zachary admitted, but I could definitely do this more often. When they returned to Ukiah, refreshed and reconnected, they found that their children had managed admirably in their absence. Joseph had even handled a minor crisis with the plumbing, fixing a leak before it became a serious problem. He is just like you, Beatrice told Zachary proudly, capable and responsible. He is better than me, Zachary said. He has had the benefit of growing up in a loving home with two parents who support him. He does not carry the scars I carried at his age. As Joseph grew into a young man, it became clear that he had inherited his father's sense of justice and his mother's business acumen. He had no interest in ranching, but he was fascinated by the law, spending hours reading whatever legal texts he could get his hands on. I want to be a lawyer, he announced when he was 17. I want to help people who cannot help themselves, who need someone to stand up for them. Zachary felt pride swell in his chest. His son had taken the lessons he had taught him about standing up for what was right and turned them into a calling. Then that is what you will do, Zachary said. Your mother and I will help you however we can. They sent Joseph to San Francisco to study law, a sacrifice that required careful budgeting but one they made gladly. Grace, meanwhile, showed an aptitude for teaching and announced her intention to follow in Mrs. Hughes's footsteps. I want to make a difference, she said. I want to help children learn and grow, especially children who come from difficult circumstances. Your mother and I are so proud of both of you, Zachary said one evening at dinner during one of Joseph's visits home from law school. You have both become exactly the kind of people the world needs more of. We learned from the best, Joseph said simply. You taught us that actions matter more than words, that standing up for what is right is worth whatever cost it might carry. Everything we are is because of what you showed us. Zachary had to excuse himself from the table for a moment, overwhelmed by emotion. Beatrice found him on the back porch, wiping his eyes. "They really are wonderful, are they not?" she said, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "They are," Zachary agreed. "Sometimes I cannot believe they are ours. After everything I had done, everything I had lost, I never imagined I would be blessed with a family like this." "You deserve it," Beatrice said firmly. "You deserve every bit of happiness you have, Zachary Foster. You are a good man, a good husband, and a good father. Never doubt that." The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and challenges. Joseph graduated from law school and opened a practice in San Francisco, quickly gaining a reputation as a fierce advocate for the underserved. Grace became a teacher in Ukiah, taking over the very schoolhouse where Mrs. Hughes had once taught. Zachary and Beatrice grew older together, their hair graying, their faces lined with the passage of time, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it deepened, becoming something richer and more complex than the passionate romance of their early years. "You ever regret it?" Beatrice asked one evening as they sat on the front porch, now in their 50s, watching the sunset. "Leaving Texas, giving up everything you knew?" "Never," Zachary said without hesitation. "Leaving Texas was the best decision I ever made. It led me here to you, to this life we have built. I would not change a single moment, not even the hard times," Beatrice pressed. "The years when money was tight, when we did not know if we would make it, especially not those times," Zachary said. "Those times taught us what we were capable of, showed us that we could face anything as long as we faced it together. I treasure those memories as much as the easy times." When Zachary was 53, he received a letter from Texas. It was from a lawyer informing him that his father had died and left him the ranch. Zachary sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter for a long time. "What do you want to do?" Beatrice asked gently. "I want to sell it," Zachary said. "I want nothing from that place, nothing from him, but I think I need to go back one more time, if only to properly say goodbye to Joseph." They made the trip together, leaving Grace to manage the boarding house. The ranch was smaller than Zachary remembered, diminished somehow by time and his own growth. He stood at Joseph's grave for a long time, telling his brother about his life, about his wife and children, about everything Joseph had missed. "I hope you found peace," Zachary said finally. "I hope wherever you are with Maria and you are happy. I am sorry I was not there to protect you. I am sorry I left you alone with him." "He knows you loved him," Beatrice said, standing beside him, "and he knows you have honored his memory by living a good life." They sold the ranch quickly, wanting nothing more than to return home. Zachary used the money to establish a scholarship fund in Joseph's name, providing opportunities for young people who wanted to pursue education or training but lacked the means. "This is what he would have wanted," Zachary said as they signed the papers establishing the fund. "A legacy of hope and opportunity rather than bitterness and regret." Joseph married a lovely young woman named Emma when he was 26, and they gave Zachary and Beatrice their first grandchild, a boy they named Zachary James, a year later. Grace married a fellow teacher named Robert when she was 25, and they had twin girls 2 years after that. Being grandparents brought new joy into Zachary and Beatrice's lives. They delighted in spoiling their grandchildren, in watching the next generation grow and thrive. The boarding house became a gathering place for family celebrations, filled with laughter and love. "Did you ever imagine this when you first saw me on that street in Ukiah?" Beatrice asked Zachary one Christmas as their whole family gathered around them, children and grandchildren filling every corner of the house with noise and joy. "Never in my wildest dreams," Zachary admitted. "I could not have imagined being this happy, this blessed. I thought my life had essentially ended when I left Texas. I was just going through the motions, working until I could not work anymore. And then I saw you, and something in me woke up. Some things do not need a reason, Beatrice quoted, smiling. Some things do not need a reason, Zachary agreed, pulling her close and kissing her forehead. I loved you before I knew your name, before I knew anything about you except that you needed help and I could provide it. Everything else, this entire life we have built, grew from that single moment of choosing to act instead of walking away. As they grew older still, they gradually turned over management of the boarding house to Grace and Robert, who moved into the main house while Zachary and Beatrice took a smaller cottage they built on the property. They remained active and engaged, helping with the grandchildren and maintaining their roles in the community. But they also enjoyed the slower pace that came with age. Zachary never lost his sense of justice or his willingness to stand up for what was right. He became known in Ukiah as someone who could be counted on to help those in need, whether through a kind word, practical assistance, or simply a willingness to listen. Beatrice continued to be a pillar of the community, respected for her business acumen and her warm hospitality. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren organized a celebration that brought together most of the town. As Zachary and Beatrice stood together, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built, Zachary was struck by how far they had come from that dusty street where they had first met. "You defended my honor that day without being asked," Beatrice said softly, echoing his thoughts. "You changed the entire course of my life with that single act of kindness." "You changed mine too," Zachary replied. "You showed me that redemption was possible, that I did not have to be defined by my past or my mistakes. You gave me a reason to hope again." They danced together as the sun set, moving slowly to the music played by a local band. Their children watched with misty eyes, recognizing the depth of love that still existed between their parents after 4 decades together. "They are still so in love," Grace whispered to Joseph. "They always have been," Joseph replied. "From the very beginning, there was something special between them, something that could not be denied or diminished." Zachary and Beatrice lived to see their grandchildren grow into adults, saw 2 of them marry and start families of their own. They celebrated their 50th anniversary surrounded by 3 generations of the family they had created together. When Zachary was 72, he suffered a heart attack while working in the garden. He survived, but it was a stark reminder of mortality, of the fact that their time together, however blessed, was finite. "I am not ready to lose you," Beatrice told him as he recovered, her voice fierce. "We have so much more life to live together." "I am not going anywhere yet," Zachary assured her, taking her hand. "I intend to stick around and be a nuisance for many more years." And he did, living until the age of 81, far longer than many men of his generation. He remained active and engaged until nearly the end, still helping out around the boarding house, still playing with his great-grandchildren, still looking at Beatrice with the same love and wonder he had felt when he first defended her honor on that dusty street so many decades before. When he finally passed peacefully in his sleep on a warm summer night, Beatrice held his hand and told him how much she loved him, how grateful she was for every single day they had shared. "You were my hero," she whispered. "From that very first day, you were my hero. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me." Zachary was laid to rest in the Ukiah cemetery, his funeral attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched over the years. Joseph gave the eulogy, speaking about a man who had taught him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. That honor was not about grand gestures, but about small, consistent choices to do what was right. My father once told a man who questioned why he had defended my mother that some things do not need a reason, Joseph said. He lived that philosophy every day of his life. He acted not for recognition or reward, but simply because it was right. The world is better because he was in it, and everyone here is richer for having known him. Beatrice lived for another 5 years after Zachary's passing, remaining active and sharp until the end. She spent her final years surrounded by family, telling stories about Zachary and their life together, making sure that the younger generations understood the remarkable man he had been. "Your grandfather was the bravest man I ever knew," she told her great-grandchildren. Not because he was fearless, but because he faced his fears and acted anyway. He taught me what real love looks like, what real courage looks like. I hope you will all carry his lessons forward into your own lives. When Beatrice finally joined Zachary, she was buried beside him, their graves side by side beneath a large oak tree. The headstones were simple but elegant, noting their years of life and the family they had created. But it was the inscription that Joseph chose for his father's stone that perhaps captured the essence of the man best, Zachary Foster, 1853–1934. He stood for what was right, loved without reservation, and built a legacy of honor and kindness. Some things do not need a reason. The boarding house continued to operate for another generation under Grace's children, eventually becoming a historic landmark in Ukiah. The scholarship fund Zachary had established in his brother's memory continued to provide opportunities for young people, touching hundreds of lives over the decades. Joseph's law practice grew into one of the most respected firms in San Francisco, known for taking cases that other lawyers would not touch, for standing up for clients who had no one else to defend them. He often told people that he had learned everything important from watching his father, from seeing how one man's choice to act could change lives. Grace's students remembered her as a teacher who believed in them, who saw potential where others saw only limitations. She taught them not just academics but character, not just knowledge but courage. She often told them the story of how their grandfather had defended their grandmother, using it as a lesson about standing up for what was right even when no one else will. The legacy of that single moment on a dusty street in Ukiah in 1878 rippled forward through generations. Every time one of Zachary and Beatrice's descendants chose to stand up for someone who needed help, every time they showed kindness without expectation of reward, every time they loved deeply and lived honorably, they were honoring the example set by two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. Because in the end, that was what Zachary and Beatrice's story was really about. It was not just a love story, though it was certainly that. It was a story about the power of choosing to act, about the ripples of consequence that flow from single moments of courage, about the way one person's decision to stand up for what is right can change not just their own life, but the lives of everyone who comes after. Some things do not need a reason. Some things are simply right, simply true, simply meant to be. And when two people find each other against all odds, when they build a life together based on mutual respect and love and courage, they create something that lasts far beyond their own years, something that echoes forward into the future like a stone dropped into still water, its ripples spreading outward infinitely, touching shores they will never see but changing the landscape forever.